experience. So the first one, which one is that? I have like 6 of these, so they rotate. Oh, this is the dating one. So, all right. So you, of course, in these dilemmas, you're the therapist. So we'll just start here. What would you like to do? And obviously, you've been attracted to this person.
I think you would like to go on a date.
Would anyone not like to go on the date? No, I mean, I kind of set it up to. So, how about back here? What do you think you would do in this situation? It's been 15 months.
You have to say no.
So you think you would have to?
Yeah.
Would you maybe just? So if you think you had to say no, would you do it anyway, or would you follow the? Would you let ethical guidelines get in the way of your heart? Put it that way. You would. Okay. How about you guys? How about you? So you don't think you can do it? No? Okay. So no one thinks you can do this. All right, let's leave it at that. How about number 2? Now, 2 and 3 are me, of course. Go ahead. On the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, ethically, is it something does my profession say that's something I'm allowed to do?
Oh, yeah. I thought you might want to follow up with you.
Okay. What did you say about 2 years?
It's going to be 2 years.
What do you guys think? Can you hear?
I thought she wrote something down.
She said you have to wait 2 years. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
Oh.
Maybe, maybe not. Well, we'll come back to that. Don't worry. That's what today's all about. Number 2. What would you like to do? I mean, I guess I'm assuming you'd like to help, right? Of course you. Well, why would you not? Like, I don't care about anybody. So what would you do? Would you have a session with? I know this is a weird place to put you guys in because you're a student. Would you have a session with the student as a therapist? You guys are saying, why are you saying no? Why not? Yeah.
I just think for them to like come to you, I think is what you could do is like direct them to somebody else. Like, I think if it was like if you were like working with them at one point and then they ended up like going to not union, it would be like oh what a coincidence.
Yeah.
But like for them to come to you and like right then and there, I just think they're in a spot and that it might just be better to be
A little
like,
awkward.
hey, I can't help you, but I know so and so, and just give them a few other resources.
Okay, but ethically, do you think I should do it? Or could do it? No, we don't think so. Does anyone think you could? Maybe not. All right, we'll get to that too. What about the second one that's in there, though? What about my colleagues? So now it's like we're not talking about a kid, we're not talking about a student. Just maybe, let's say it's a art professor, someone I'd never see. And he just heard there's a therapist on campus, caught wind, then needs help, and I see him as a client, or her as a client. Not everybody at once. What would you like to do? Would you like to help that person? Do you think we could?
I'd like to help them, but
Be honest and say I don't know. What do you think? Ethically, do you think this is okay?
I feel like if they would have thought of it right way. Even if they reached out to you, not like through school,
Okay.
like not at EDU, but like a different form,
Okay. So maybe it's
like through your practice.
so maybe this one's okay. And then finally the last one. This is like an old little house on the prairie thing. Can't pay the doctor bills, but we have a pig. All right, I'll do the surgery. What do you think? I guess this gets into that weird area of like taking gifts and stuff like that. And of course you'd like to. I don't even want to have that question on. Like, why would you not want to help? But do you think you can, I guess, on this one? Is this something I would be allowed to do? Or would I just, so that everyone says no? All right, well, I'll answer all of these questions. And in fact, we will answer all these questions. Some of them you're allowed to do, some of them you're not. So the answers are a little bit different. But we'll get to that. So today is all about Well, ethics, of course. You don't need to write all of that down. So the ethics of being a marriage and family therapist. After this, we'll get to a whole new set of theories, but I thought, let's do something a little bit different because we've been on that train for a while. So if you didn't know, one thing to write down is these 5 letters, AAMFT. This is a club that I belong to. It's an association. So the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. That is the overall governing body of MFTs. So we have a conference every year. There's a journal for marriage and family therapy. But this is the professional organization that sets the rules, sets all the standards. And it's also the professional organization where you would find our code of ethics. It doesn't matter if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, you're a mechanic, probably. I don't know. But almost every professional organization has something called a code of ethics, which is simply the rules that you need to play by when you're doing your job. And it might sound boring on the outside, but it gets into some interesting situations like you have in front of yourself. So the purpose of ethics, why are we talking about this? Why is this even important? So what it is, you want the textbook definition of professional ethics. It's just the standard of care, standards of practice, the rules you have to play by. Of course, you have a lot of freedom as a marriage and family therapist, but there are some standards. And why? I'll just put them all up here. Why in the world are we talking about this, and why do we need something called a code of ethics? Which, by the way, if you go to their website, you can download it for free. I think it's about 80 pages. We're not going to read it all. But it's one of those, those codes like a constitution. Like, well, can I do this? Well, let's see. Paragraph 6, Article 5, line 1.2 says, no. So why do we do this? Well, one is absolutely primary reason is to protect the clients, the consumers. Right? There's in every profession, there's some bad apples, right? There's mechanics that want to rip you off, and then there's mechanics that you can trust. There's plumbers that want to rip you off. There's plumbers you can trust. Well, every single profession has individuals like that. There are situations you could find yourself in therapy where you could be taken advantage of. And that's what the Code of Ethics is designed to protect you from. It's also to protect me as the therapist. If I find myself in some weird legal situation, which does happen, because when you're dealing with family therapy and couples and marital, right? There's arguments, there's grudges, whatever it is. Guess what? If I follow the Code of Ethics, I'm protected. I'm 100%, so it protects me as well. If I didn't do anything wrong, maybe you think I did something wrong, but no, actually in the Code of Ethics, it says I can do this or I can't do that. And then last but not least, it keeps the government out of our business. So if you have a Code of Ethics as a professional organization, all right, you're taking care of yourself. This stuff gets voted on, agreed upon, and then stuff that we don't need to get into, like state legislators and things like this have to give you the stamp of approval, but we are approved in Ohio. So our Code of Ethics has been approved federally and state by state. Every state in the United States has approved MFTs saying, okay, you guys are good enough. You can do what it is you want to do. So when we get into these, this is where we'll start answering some of these questions. So like I said, I'm not going to ask you to read the entire 80-page document. You don't need to memorize it. But what I would like you to know is the major parts that it's broken up into and how it impacts family therapists. With each of these, we'll expand a couple points as we go. So first, the first major dimension is called professional responsibility. When someone comes to therapy, and on Tuesday, I think someone shared personal experience with this, if I remember correctly. When you go to therapy, it's your therapy. You're the one coming there for help, not the therapist, which may sound odd to you, but sometimes when therapists have issues that they are currently dealing with or issues that they've never dealt with, it can come out in the therapy, in the work of therapy. You guys are really writing all of that down. That's okay. What this means practically for someone who wants to be a therapist, maybe you're thinking about that, is before you become a therapist, part of your journey will be getting therapy yourself. That's built into training programs. I had to do it. All of my friends had to do it. All my colleagues had to do it. The idea, it's not saying you need to be perfect, like emotionally, right? That's not what it's saying at all. But what's important, though, is that you've dealt with past issues so that they don't come out in the work that you have with clients. Again, it doesn't mean you build a perfect life and everyone has to be perfect, but I guess it's that old idea of if you're training for a marathon and you have two choices, who do you want to go to? The trainer that looks like a runner or the trainer who looks like they've never taken a step in their entire life? Like I'm going to choose, that's kind of the idea. Like you need to be mentally fit and emotionally stable yourself. So professional responsibility, it's all about taking care of yourself as a therapist, basically. The second dimension that's in there is called competence. I like my dentist. Not only is he kind of a fun guy, but he's always telling me about like the latest technology that's out there, which makes me feel better. I was just at the dentist on Tuesday, so I no longer feel anxious. On Tuesday, I was a wreck. I hate going to the dentist. I'm like a 9-year-old kid. I still get nervous. But he's always telling me about like the cool stuff, like the new technology, like with the lasers and stuff like that. Because he goes to things like dentist conferences, and he learns new things, like new tools for dentists. And they purchase them at their practice, and they use them, and it's fantastic. That's kind of what this is all about. If you go to a licensed MFT, and assuming this person is following the rules, they are constantly learning new things. Yes, we've learned about Bowen. You're never going to meet a marriage and family therapist who's like classic, strict Bowenian, because that's from 1965. It's interesting to talk about, but we've expanded, we've grown from them, we've added on to that. So as a therapist, here's what I have to do. I get every 2 years with my license, if I want to keep my license, every 2 years I have to gain 30 CEUs, and that stands for Continuing Educational Unit, if you haven't already written that down. What in the world is, what is this? What do I have to do to get a CEU? Any ideas? So you go to a therapist, maybe they just did this. Well, of course you don't know. Why would you know? So last year I went to the AA MFT conference in, where were we at? Georgia? It was lovely. But anyway, as I went there, I had to go to like 5 or 6 different little sessions on things like mindfulness and marriage and family therapy, and helping people with PTSD and marriage and family therapy. In other words, I also have to go to classes. It never stops. You're constantly learning. So gaining a CEU is like going to like a 3-hour talk by a professional of some new technique to help people in some new way. So that's what a CEU is. Built into this is something kind of helpful, I guess, for clients. 4 of those 30 CEUs have to be in ethics, so what we're talking about today. As the ethical laws change, sometimes they get updated. And another 4 of those have to be in multicultural competence. In other words, built into MFT's licensure is learning how to be more diverse and understanding more diverse populations. No one's saying you have to be a multicultural expert on everything. So CEUs. So therapists, we need to be responsible for ourselves, take care of ourselves. We also need to never stop learning. We have to stay confident in our field. Oh, this is a fun one. We're not really to anything having to do with when I passed out yet. I'll tell you the same story I told Team A on Tuesday. So I went to Ohio State for my MFT training, which you probably already know. Small place, I mean, in terms of class size, at least for the MFT program, my cohort was made up of 3 people. Myself, a girl from India, and another girl from Rhode Island. But anyway, small group. All told, there were like maybe 13 of us, 13 or 15 MFT students in the doctoral program. This was my first year. And I remember having gone through this myself. So when we're in the process of interviewing and trying to bring in new students, part of that process was all of us getting together and talking to them to see if we would think this person's a good fit, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember a girl, she was actually at Ohio State, and she wanted to join our MFT program, so she had done the application. And now we were to the point where she was talking to all of us. There were like 13 of us in the room. And Dennis, the same guy he's going to come up several times today, by the way. Dennis, who was 2 years ahead of me, just asked what I thought was a normal question. He just said, just out of curiosity, let's say you had a gay couple come into therapy. Do you think there's anything different about them than a typical heterosexual couple that you'd need to address issues any differently? And she looked him straight in the eye and she said, I would never help them to begin with because that goes against my faith. And that's when she was asked to leave and never come back. That's what this one is all about. You're allowed to believe whatever the heck you want to believe in, but you can't bring it into the therapy room and you can't push your values onto your clients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what this is all about. So moral standards and values, again, you can believe what you want to believe, but you can't, put it this way, you can't use that to discriminate against clients at all. Or that's actually unethical and you could get your license taken away. So I guess we're different than bakers, right? Bakers can say, I don't want to bake the cake. As a therapist, sorry, you got to do the work. However, let's say something does come up that you just don't feel comfortable with. Does that mean, are you forced to do therapy with? No, actually you're not. There is an out. I'm going to write the number 3 because that's, I guess, what it comes down to. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you just don't feel comfortable, which does happen for various reasons, ethically, you're protected. So you can inform them, I don't think this is going to be a good fit, but you have to give them at least 3 referrals on their way. In other words, you can't leave them hanging. You can make a personal choice not to work with someone, but you can't leave them without any other resources. The main way this comes out, but I've never had any couple or individual, and I never say I've heard it all, because every time I think that something else comes. The only time this has ever happened for myself, and how it normally plays out, is if someone comes to you and their issues are just kind of beyond your expertise. Like, I like working with people with anxiety issues because I've done that a lot. But I remember, this is last year, someone came in, I wish I could have helped him, but he had some serious addiction issues. And I know a lot about addiction, but I'm not an addiction expert. I don't have a certification in that. So unfortunately, I was I just don't think, I'd love to help you, but I think someone else could help you a lot better than me. So I had to give the guy 3 referrals. So that's usually when this comes up, is moral standards and values. I haven't heard that really come out. So then finally, this is the bedrock of the therapeutic relationship. Confidentiality. Of course, for no reason are you allowed to talk about clients with anyone outside the therapy room, even your spouse. Now, can you talk about it in a general sense? Of course you can. Can I tell stories from the therapy room? Of course I can. But this proverbial change the names, get rid of any Any information that you think could be used, of course, to identify the person, absolutely not. So confidentiality, again, the cornerstone, I guess, of the counseling relationship, but this is not absolute. So there are times when confidentiality can absolutely be broken. And that has to do with these. Again, we'll expand maybe a little bit on some of these. Like any other, I guess, medical intervention that you seek out, the first session is full of paperwork. Like there's various things the client has to fill out, forms, and sign this and sign that. And built into therapy is something called a suicide contract, which might sound morbid, but it's there for a reason. If someone, oh, by the way, I guess we should define this. If someone in the therapy room starts talking about suicidal ideations, there's something that I have to do, and I have to break confidentiality for that reason. But let's define this. What is a suicidal ideation? Because it's different than a suicidal thought. Exactly. So, I mean, I guess scale it up for you. A suicidal thought is when it's crossed your mind, that I've thought about what it might like to not be here anymore. I've thought about suicide has crossed my mind. Someone's saying that. Yeah, okay, let's have that conversation. In fact, we should talk about that. But suicidal thoughts are actually really, really common. In fact, it's estimated like 25% of college students have suicidal thoughts on a semi-regular basis. That's one realm, though. Suicide is not a good thing. It's a sign of maybe something's going on. A suicidal ideation is when someone actually has a plan. They've thought it out to the point of, this is how I would do it, and I think I might do it next Thursday. If that happens, what do I have to do ethically? Which technically means, I guess the point here is when I say ethically, technically it's also legally, because if you break the ethics, you can get into legal trouble. They're all tied together. But what do I have to do as a therapist? This has happened to me before. Any ideas? And it's in the suicide contract that people sign. I have to stop the therapeutic session. I mean, not like, stop it. You have to call 911. You have to call the police, and they'll be taken away to a hospital. That's what will happen ethically. So for this reason, guess who people never tell their suicidal ideations to? Their therapist. Because they know this will happen. So it's actually very rare for therapists to be the ones that hear about this, because they know if they say something, they're going to be taken away. Now, this also works in a different way. Because of the state of our mental health care system in the US, some people, knowing this, come to therapy and start talking about suicidal ideations, so they will get taken away. Because they know they need help, and they also know the only way they're going to be able to get into a psychiatric hospital is to start talking this way, because there's no other way they can get the level of care that they actually need. So it's a strange world. So danger to self. A second reason this could happen. Now write down a word. Let's see. I don't think anyone on Tuesday recognized this. Does anyone recognize that name, Parasoft? Does it ring a bell? Maybe not. It's sort of ringing a bell. Okay, so if someone comes in the therapy room and says something like, I think next week I'm going to go shoot up North Canton High School. Well, number one, now there's two people that I need to call. The first, of course, is the police, right? Now it's become a legal situation. So just like the danger itself, we have to call the police, and now it's a situation. Who else do I have to call them? The school, absolutely. Now I can't give names like, hey, Alan here. Yeah, he's going to come in. No, what I need to do is call North Canton and say, I'm a therapist, and there's been a viable threat against your school. I can't give any, and they can't ask. I mean, they can ask, but I can't tell them. I can't give out any identifying information, but it's my duty to warn them, look, there's been a threat put out against you. That's all I can really say, but just so you know that it's out there. And then they can contact the police and they can decide where they're going to take it. But as far as that, I've done my duty. I haven't necessarily broken the confidentiality agreement, but I've done what I need to do. And it's all because of Tarasoff. The Tarasoff case is something from the 1970s that changed ethics forever in the world of counseling and in the world of therapy. What happened was this. This was, I think it was the 1970s, 60s. I mean, I wasn't around either. But anyway, place just like this. In fact, it was a satellite campus, I believe, of the University of California, and just a counselor working at the school had a guy come in. He was a student at the university, and he definitely suffered from schizophrenia or some type of psychotic disorder, because there was hallucinations and delusions. And but the important part is he kept talking about a girl he was obsessed with. I guess they had gone on a few dates, and the girl had kind of broken off with him, maybe because he was obsessive. He was not differentiated. He had a very low differentiation of self. But anyway, so he started talking about this girl, and he started talking about how he wanted to kill her because he couldn't have her, and he wanted to kill her. Now, at the time, the therapist actually did the right thing, what was in the ethical rules. He contacted the police and said, look, I've got a client here he says he wants to kill this woman. So they took him away, and that was it. He never really, I don't think he'd served any time or anything like that, because nothing ever really happened. It was just this therapy thing that happened, and the counselor followed the rules. Well, 3 weeks later, she was kidnapped and murdered by this guy. And what had happened was, he had called the police, but he never picked up the phone, even though it was clear who the target was. She was never warned. She was just blissfully ignorant. She had broken up with this guy like a month ago, 2 months ago, had no idea she was like the target of some kind of threat at all. As far as she knew, this was over, and just a weird guy that I dated a month ago, and that he kidnapped her and killed her. And she was never warned, like, hey, just so you know, someone has talked about murdering you. Maybe you should know. And then she probably would have put the pieces together and said, then we could have like a protective thing or something like that. But so now part of our duty is to warn not just the police or the legal entities involved, but also whoever the threat has been made against. And then last but not least, with abuse and neglect, you actually don't need proof. The burden of proof for abuse and neglect is if, as a therapist or a counselor, you suspect that it's more likely than not that someone is being abused or neglected, whether that's a partner, right? If a partner comes in, you've got 10 sessions, and every other session there's been a black eye or some kind of like bruising, and there's always an excuse. If it's adults you're dealing with, you have to call the police. But if it's a kid, you have to call Children's Services right then and there. I've only had to do that 3 times. It's the most uncomfortable, but you're doing the right thing. So if you, and again, you're getting these suspicions for a reason. It's not like it's coming out of the blue and you're not a therapist trying to take children away from parents. But they know this coming in. So again, all this is built into paperwork and the initial conversation. So it's not like this is coming out of left field for people. Like, oh, by the way, just so you know. And all this is built into those initial conversations you'll have with the client. So they're aware that this is something that could potentially happen. And now is where we'll start talking maybe about some of these, but let's get these out of the way too. So, right, so we got several kind of rules that are built in. Now we've already kind of gone over this one. So rules that are built for you, for your protection. What does your therapist have to do? One, your therapist has to get multicultural competence. We already talked about that. You got to get 4 out of every 2 years, 4 CUs based in this. A second is called client dependency. in my life, I came up with a quote spontaneously that I really like. You're not going to find it on the internet because it's not famous. But I was doing an interview about therapy for something completely different. And somehow this came out of my mouth. I said, therapy is a unique job because it's one of the only jobs where it's your job to get fired. Like, that actually makes sense. But that's what this means. Clients have goals. When they reach these goals, they're supposed to leave. Put it this way. A lot of clients, for various reasons, do get dependent on the therapist and the therapeutic process. They just keep coming back. There's really nothing they're working on. It's almost become like a pseudo friendship. Like they're relying on the therapist just for someone to talk to, which is okay. However, sometimes, put it this way, a therapist could very easily say, well, gosh, I got this guy, John. He comes in every week. It's like the easiest client. All he does is we just talk about his life, and that's it. Pays me $100 a session. All right, I want to keep my paycheck going, right? I'm just going to keep him around. Actually, ethically, that's the wrong thing to do. When a client reaches their goals and you feel like they can maintain these goals outside the therapy room, there's a process called termination that's supposed to happen. But sometimes clients get taken advantage of, and they just kind of get left around, going in circles and circles. And you'll meet people who say, I've been in therapy for 10 years. What? Like, that's not how it's really supposed to go. Something's not happening correctly with the therapeutic process if that's what the therapy is like. So client dependency, you're supposed to get terminated at some point. It's not supposed to be an endless cycle. Informed consent. You sign these if you ever do a research project. I am allowed to talk about clients, actually, to other people. So confidentiality absolutely can be broken, but I need to get their permission first, written in a form saying, so if a lawyer calls me and says, hey, look, we think you're seeing Rebecca. She's getting divorced from Tom. We'd like to know some stuff. Like, I can't tell that lawyer anything. I can't even tell them that I see Rebecca in therapy unless I get her permission. If I go to her and say, look, can I talk to the lawyer? Sure. And then even in that informed consent form, there's rules of what I can say and what I can't say, things like that. So informed consent, you can talk outside the room. You just need to get their permission first. We kind of already talked about this. Referrals, yes, you have to. If something goes out of your scope of practice or something happens in the therapy where you don't feel comfortable for whatever reason that might be, yes, you have to give the person at least 3 referrals. And then finally, actually this isn't the last one, but this is where we'll start talking about our stuff. There's this thing called dual relationships that can happen. In fact, we watched this on Tuesday, so we pull something up. I'm going to do a little mini online lecture, but part of your content here is this, something brief to read. It's really like literally a page. So. But this will introduce you to the idea of dual relationships. Every time I watch this, I wonder what the backstory to some of these. Damn it, Joe, we can't sleep together. But I'm your therapist. This one especially. What's happening here? accompaniment was done by Salvador Minuchin in the background. No. That's probably the last romantic guitar Salvador Minuchin joke that you'll hear for the semester. So, all right, let's start talking about these because dual relationships is part of one of these. Let's go back to our first one. So, I'll just call him Dennis because Dennis was the therapist. So this happened in our clinic, and I remember very vividly kind of how this played out. So there's a backstory to this. So Dennis, about a year and a half or so prior, had this client come in, and every week you'll do this if you become a therapist someday. Every week we had what we called group supervision every Wednesday, and what that meant was we kind of all sat in a big room. Remember the room I told you about with the family that came in and meshed? Same room. Anyway, so we're all sitting on the love seats. No, so we just talk about our clients, talk about life, what's going on. It's just like the get together for a couple hours and just hang out. But it's also the place where we talked about client issues. If something was bugging us, we're stuck, we don't know what we're doing. And Dennis spoke up, which is what he's supposed to do. It turns out he was really attracted to a client that he was seeing, and he just said, "I'm not sure what I'm really supposed to do about this because we're rookie therapists, so we're learning about all this stuff as we're going." He was just really attracted to his client, and my supervisor Suzanne, who's still there, said, "Well, Dennis, you know what you're supposed to do." He's like, "Well, do we need to end there? Am I allowed to see this guy still?" It's like, "Well, yeah, you actually can. So ethically, you can keep seeing a client that you're attracted to." I mean, we're humans, right? You're going to meet people you're attracted to in therapy, and clients that might be attracted to you are going to come through your door. It's not like just because, sorry, we can't see you, I'm attracted to you. No, I can't. What does Dennis have to do? And what's the ethical thing if you find yourself physically attracted to a client to the point where you're thinking about it? What do you have to do? And you don't necessarily have to end therapy. Any ideas? It's a really radical idea. You have to talk about it. You have to bring it up in therapy and say, just so you know, like, no, that's not how it goes. But no, you talk about it in the therapy room, and guess what happened? Dennis brought it up to his client, and guess what his client said? "I'm also attracted to you." Okay, well, we got that out in the open, so what would you like to do as the client? Like, do you feel comfortable enough? Do you want to keep coming in? I mean, I'm a professional. This isn't going to get in the way of our therapeutic process. It's an amazing thing that happens when you talk about something and get it out in the open. It ceases to become as big of an issue as you think it is. And it worked out. The therapy continued. As far as we knew, nothing going on. But it was fine. And then there was termination, and the client left, and things were okay. And then, about a year and a half later, Dennis saw this client outside the therapy room. Oh, remember, we were attracted to each other. Guess what? 15 months later, we're still attracted to each other. What can Dennis do? Ethically, it's been 15 months. That's not exactly 2 years. But can he ask this client out on a date? Or let's say actually how this happened was the client actually asked him. So Dennis didn't approach him and say, "Hey, would you like to go out?" The client said to Dennis, "Hey, would you like to go out now? Because you're no longer my therapist." Any ideas? Is it 2 years? I'm going to push the button. I mean, come on, this is a human relationship, right? No. So the answer to this one is the last one of these. In the world of MFT, it's never. It's not 2 years. You just can't. If someone has been your client in the past, you are ethically not allowed. That doesn't mean you can't do it. Of course, I mean you can do whatever you want to do because you're a human being. But ethically speaking, you're going against the code of ethics as a therapist if you go on a date with someone who's been your client professionally. You don't need to write this part down. People have actually studied this. Like, what happens when someone, this is the reason MFT does this. What happens when it's been 2 years, right? Or it's been 3 years or whatever it is, and you meet a client outside the room and you date them. Does it work out sometimes? I'm sure that it does. Although I have yet to meet someone who's married and I say, hey, where'd you guys meet? Therapy. It was great. Remember when you were my therapist? I've never heard that story. I've heard a lot of stories, people meeting in a lot of places. Now they've studied this, and they usually end very badly, these relationships. And what happens is the person who was the client actually ends up feeling like they've been exploited. And in hindsight, they're like, how did I ever let that happen? How did you ever let that happen? Because therapy, for various reasons, is a very intimate, emotional process. You end up, right, sharing things with this therapist you probably don't share with other people. So there's a power dynamic that starts to develop here, right? And it just becomes a weird situation. And there's studies that show clients who enter these relationships end up with more depression, more anxiety, suicidal thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. So MFT as an organization just said, let's just write this in our code of ethics. No, let's just make it unethical. Now, where you might have heard the 2-year rule is from other organizations. So we're not the only kid on the block that does therapy, right? There's counselors. Well, guess what? They have their own association, the American Counseling Association. There's the American Psychological Association. The APA says 2 years. So if for a psychologist, go to a psychologist, you can date them. Go to a marriage and family therapist, if they're ethical at least, they're not going to date you. So all of these different organizations have different rules, but AMFT says no, sorry, that's just never. Let's just make it happen. So what happened? Well, Dennis succumbed to temptation and actually ended up going out with the client. And of course, this got back to you're right, he's still a student at Ohio State, so it's not like he's on his own. And it came back to our clinic that this had happened, and he was given a choice, like you can either end the relationship or you can leave the program. And he chose to stay in the relationship and actually abandoned 3.5 years worth of a doctoral program. He was probably 6 months from graduating, and he chose to just forego that to go out with his client. I honestly don't know what happened. Someone asked me on Tuesday, if you're out there watching, I did Google him and I couldn't find him. So she's like, look him up on Facebook and find out. There are some people who aren't on Facebook, and he seems to be one of them. So I actually did look him up because I haven't talked to him. Because he just left. He wanted nothing. He couldn't believe. He thought he was angry at the program. Like, how can you? These are discussions we've had for 3.5 years, Dennis. You just can't go out with your client. You just can't do it. So yeah, amazing. So he left. How about number 2? Because it kind of has to do with exactly what we were just talking about. Everything we've been talking about, actually. Can I see the student? That one should be easy. No, of course I can't. That's a classic dual relationship. Right? What if I have a student who's sharing things with me in therapy, right? And I care about my clients. It's not okay. It just puts everyone in an uncomfortable situation. I can't care about one student more than all the other students, right? It's just a like you said, it's like an uncomfortable situation that luckily, professionally, they say, no, that's not okay. It's also not okay, by the way, to see the colleague, the 40-some-year-old colleague from even if he's someone that I don't even interact with. And the reason that's not okay, same reasons, but it's the potential. It's the potential of putting us both in a compromising, uncomfortable situation. What if 2 years from there, I'm going up for promotion and he's sitting on the promotion committee? Oh, well. Right? That puts him in a weird spot. What if he doesn't, so dual relationships, most of them are not okay ethically. Yeah.
So what happens if you have a family and the kids young, and then if you work here as well, and they're from an area close by.
Yeah.
And then they ended up going to school here or choosing school here. Is that okay? How do you figure that?
That is a great question. See, these are the fun little ethical dilemmas that occur. I don't know. I don't know how you would handle it. But see, they constantly come up.
It's just you have to tell that kid as a child.
Technically, by the book, you'd be having this conversation in therapy saying, I can't have this student in my class or that sort of thing. It almost seems cruel, doesn't it?
If they were I want to join the site. Well,
yeah.
Forget Dr. Meyer.
Yeah. Well, and the out would be, that's just my guess, but I'm going to ask Suzanne. That's a great question. No one has ever brought that up. But see, ethical dilemmas never stop getting creative. You know, here's the thing. Since she asked that question, I'm honestly, let's say that did happen, because that potentially could happen. I could see a family and there's a kid, they go to Mount Union. What I'm ethically supposed to do if I'm in that situation is there's actually a whole team of lawyers for AA MFT. I've called them many, many times. And you're supposed to call them, they consult, and they come up with an answer, and they give you that answer. So there's outs. It's not like these are like written in stone. So I'm actually guessing, now that we're talking about it, depending on the situation, they would probably say, okay, but you need to have this conversation with the family. And
yeah, I feel like if they're super young, you start having super young in therapy, and then like years go by.
Yeah.
There'd be like good places too.
I agree. So great question. We should come up with ethical dilemmas. That is one. How about the last one? And then we'll get to my special couple. Oh, they're not here. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan and Joan. That's not their names either. Can I do this? I was stumped because I had seen this. I knew they were really down on their luck. And this is exactly, I think he wanted to help fix my car, my truck, or like just offer services because he was a mechanic really good. He had just been unemployed for a long time. And of course I went to Suzanne. I was expecting her to say, no, you just can't do this. But I was actually shocked when she said, actually you can, and you should. So part of our mission, just like the medical profession of any kind, is the first thing is to help the clients, right? Our mission is to help people, right? And not turn them away. Here's the rule. And you've probably heard that therapists can't accept gifts. Actually, that's not true either. Therapists, I've gotten lots of gifts. I mean, not done, but here's my gift collection. Nothing that valuable, don't get too excited. Here's the rule though, you're allowed to accept gifts and you're actually allowed to trade services for services. But the rule states, first, this is not recommended. So they kind of leave this as a gray area. It's not recommended, and it can only happen if you can guarantee it will not interfere with the therapeutic process. And you also have to guarantee you will not exploit the client or take advantage of them. So this is why it's a very fine area. If I was seeing a couple and they said, you know, I mean, obviously I'm getting paid. If they came up to me and said, here's a $100 Amazon gift card that we really appreciate, Merry Christmas, I would actually, no, I wouldn't take, that's too big. I would love to, thank you so much. But that's like, no. I'm not your kid. I'm not your granddaughter. That's no. But I once had a kid, this was one of the best. Like he presented, like it was after the therapy process. And one of the things we did together is we drew a lot. Like he talked about his family through pictures and things like that. And the mom swears he came up with it by himself. After like the termination thing, they actually came in. They already hadn't seen them in a while. Little kid bought me a box of crayons. He said, to help the next kid. I'm like, oh, you take this back. No, of course I can. Are you kidding? And I keep it. Like, it's like, that's awesome. Like, I love it. So clients sometimes, it's a judgment call. It's up to you. You don't always have to call the lawyers at AA MFT. But you know where the line is being drawn and what's okay and what's not. So we are allowed to accept gifts, but those are the rules. It's not recommended. You can't exploit, and it can't interfere with the therapeutic process. So, although I'd love to exploit a couple who wants to drop $100 Amazon gift card, but I can't do it. That's what that is. Okay, you ready? So here's a bonus. Here's a bonus ethical dilemma that'll take us a little bit to get to. See, now if I type them up, and maybe you won't think this is so weird, but to this day, this is maybe one of the strangest situations, I think, the strangest couple, I guess, presenting to me. So it was I was by myself in the clinic, but it was a typical day. And I knew I had a couple coming in. And the wife had called, which is normal. And the things that she said on the phone were also normal. She just said, we fight a lot. And I think we're headed for a divorce. And they'd only been married a few months. I just thought maybe they rushed into it. You get all these assumptions here. But anyway, that's who was coming in. All right, so here they come. They come in. There's nothing strange about them that I like outwardly, so nothing like caught my eye. It was just typical, like, "Hi, you must be Kevin." Yes, I'm Kevin. And they sat down in the room, and that's when it got a little strange right off the bat, because I just said my proverbial, like, "All right, so who wants to tell me why you're here and how do you think I can help?" And that's what I said. And there was this. They both kind of sat there like this, and then they kept looking at each other, and then I'm like, exactly. And this went on for maybe 60 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time. But when you've asked a question like that, and two people are just staring back at you, and every once in a while looking at each other, and they were like nudging, like, "Do you want to go? Do you want to go?" But not in like a mean way. Like it was, and I was like, "Guys," and I don't remember how I broke the silence, but it was something like that. And then the guy, like, you know when someone breaks your barrier, right? Your boundary, let's put it that way. Literally got right in my face, like a Seinfeld episode with the close talker. And he looked at me really intently, and I was like, "What the hell?" Like in my mind, he just said, "Do you know what a LARP is?" That's exactly what I did. Really, I'm not sure if you, of course you didn't see her face, but she went like, "Did you hear what I said? Do you know what a LARP is?" Just like that, like staring at me. Of course, there's no masks, so he's breathing on me. And I just stared right back. I'm not kidding. I just said, "I have no idea what that is." I'm already weirded out a little bit. Does anyone know what a LARP is? Because then he like sat back, because I think he was a little, I'm not sure if he was disappointed in my answer, because he kind of sat back, looked at his wife, and they're both like, and I was like, "Well, like, okay, so tell me." Like, then I think when I responded that way, they're like, "Oh," so they're like, what's a LARP? Does anyone know what a LARP? No one knows what a LARP is? Team A, a couple people did. You seem to know, but you seem like uncomfortable that you know this, but it's okay.
Isn't it like role playing?
LARP stands for live action role play. Okay, so he's like, it stands for live action role play. I'm like, "Oh, okay, like Dungeons and Dragons." No, not exactly. He's like, it's like the one that we go to is based in vampire lore. I'm like, "What?" And then the light bulb went off. Oh, I get it. So he said every Wednesday they come to Beavis Hall. Beavis Hall is the engineering building at Ohio State. Every Wednesday night from like 7 to 9, they get a whole floor, a couple classrooms, so that they can do their LARP, their live action role play. What they do is they get dressed up like their vampire characters. And I'm not judging, because who cares? If this is your thing, this is your thing. And I think they kind of caught on right away that I wasn't judging them at all, so they got really comfortable telling me everything. It's like we get dressed up, and they get their vampire costumes, and they play their game. It is like a Dungeons and Dragons thing. There's like a game master, and I don't know how it works exactly, but there's a storyline, and the characters. The reason you're dressed up is as you play your game, you act out what's going on. So it's a live action role play. Cool, whatever. That's their thing. Well, here's why they were here. And this is so far odd, but whatever. The reason they were coming to therapy was because they didn't know each other up until about 3 months ago. And that's when another light bulb, wait a second, didn't she say on the phone that they've only been married for about 3 months? They met in the LARP. Well, they didn't really meet in the LARP. Put it this way, their characters met in the LARP. In other words, he's from this side of Columbus, she's from this side of Columbus. They both come to the LARP dressed like their vampire characters, and their characters met each other. Inside, I get it, even talking about it sounds strange. Their characters met each other. Now, the way they described it was, I guess their characters, the love story between their two characters was like the main thing in the game. Like, I guess sort of like on Tuesday we had a joke about Twilight, whether her name's Bella and whoever. But anyway, They were like the central focus of the game for like 3 weeks. Like it was all about their characters. So they're so into the LARP. I mean, I guess you got to be so into the LARP to even be at this LARP because they really got dressed up. They were so into the LARP that they decided to enhance the game. Let's get married in real life. Because if we get married in real life, then the game's going to feel even more real. So they literally got married in real life without even knowing each other. But their characters knew each other. So their therapy was supposed to be this. Now, this is where it gets even a little bit weirder. They wanted to come to couples therapy to work on their marriage. They wanted to do that, and I was their couples therapist. They each, though, wanted their own individual therapy so that they could each become more like their characters in the vampire lore, because that was the crux of the problem. In the game, I guess the guy was really brave and outgoing and dominant, but in real life, he wasn't any of those things. He had low self-esteem. He just whatever. So he wanted individual therapy to become more like his vampire, and she wanted individual therapy to become more like her vampire. Although I see them as a couple working on their real selves. All right, are we there yet? All right, so here's where it got even a little stranger, believe it or not. They're just packed with stuff. So what I learned is another thing going on with them is they both wanted an open marriage. You know what that is? So an open marriage is when you just both agree, hey, we're married, but we can just sleep with whoever we want. Well, not exactly. The crux of the thing they kept arguing about was they couldn't agree on the contract. They couldn't agree on the open marriage agreement. Like who would I be able to sleep with, who am I not able to sleep with? How often am I able to do it? How many? So that was the therapy that they wanted. Okay, I can work on a contract, sure. So that was their couples therapy. Now, we also agreed, and Suzanne, this had never happened in our little, remember, it's only 13, we're like a little group therapy place. So there's 13, 15 of us. This had never happened before. No one had ever requested, hey, a couples therapist at the same time, 2 extra individual therapists. But Suzanne was like, sure, we can do that. So the woman goes to Robin. Dennis, remember Dennis? He's still here. Dennis actually saw the husband. So I'm getting nowhere. So they're coming in for weeks and weeks. And the contract was kind of like the easy thing, but they're still just, you can tell, they just don't even seem to like each other in real life whatsoever. Well, we come to group therapy one night, about a month had passed, and as we're kind of leaving group therapy, Dennis comes up to me and says, look, man, there's something, and Robin was there too, and we're all there. But he's like, the guy, he's been sleeping around with he's completely breaking this contract, because we had talked about the contract in group therapy. He's like, he's completely like sleeping around. And suddenly it made perfect sense. And Robin, who was also there, was like, well, guess what? So is she. And then it all made sense to me why I was having such a difficult time in couples therapy, because they're both lying to me. In couples, they're both, because when they both came in, like, oh yes, I'm following the contract perfectly. Well, of course they weren't doing this. Uh-oh, now we have an ethical dilemma. Is that okay? Was Dennis allowed to say anything to me? I mean, I'm the couples therapist. We're in group therapy. Dennis broke all sorts of rules. So technically, no, he's actually not. So the bonus was I didn't know how to write this out. It's way too long. But the bonus was secrets. And now this gets talked about at Ohio State's clinic. They still talk about this case. No, so technically, I am their therapist. And they signed a confidentiality agreement with me that I wouldn't talk about them in specific ways outside of the counseling room, except with my supervisor, which of course I'm allowed to do that. Dennis, when the guy became his individual client, that's that guy's therapy. And that's his confidential to say anything, right? And he had exposed to Dennis, I'm doing all this stuff, with the understanding that Dennis isn't going to say anything. And Robin, to the woman, same thing. By telling me, they had completely broken their individual confidentiality, even though they told me to help me with my couples therapy. Isn't this crazy? So they literally made a rule at our clinic at Ohio State that this can no longer happen. If someone is being seen as a couple, they can't have their own individual therapist at the same time. And it became some kind of rule with like group practices, like they cause a ripple effect. Any questions?
Now, if it's kind of like a confidentiality statement that said like you can talk to others, like.
Oh, then absolutely. But they hadn't done that. Right. And then what do? What do I do next? Now I have this information. I have this secret information. I know you're sleeping around. I know you're sleeping around. Am I allowed to say it? Because that's how it came out to Suzanne was, what do I do? How do I keep this like crazy amount of information secret? What we agreed to do is everyone get together. And Suzanne was even there as a supervisor saying, look, this happened in our clinic. Dennis was there, problems there, I was there. And we all got it out in the open, I guess, as adults and talked about it. Anyway, long story short, that was them. And then last but not least, these are just 4 little red flags to look out for. I guess both as a client, but mainly as a therapist. In other words, if these things happen, it doesn't mean anything wrong has happened. It just means something wrong might be on the horizon. The first, of course, is attraction. Again, you just need to do the right thing and talk about it and not let it get in the way professionally. But it's certainly a red flag. It's inviting. If you don't handle it the right way, something could happen. The second, by alterations, we don't mean clothing. Let me take this out. Alterations means are you doing things a little bit differently than for this client that you normally do? A third one means, are you actually violating some kind of standards at your profession? So the third one takes that a little bit further. Are you not charging them? Like, oh, just come in next week. And the fourth is isolation. Do you find yourself wanting to be alone with this person? Do you try to set up sessions specifically so you know no one else will be around? Guess what? Kind of a creepy example on too. I told this would be like as a student, if you're like asking a professor, like, hey, we need to talk about the class, can we get together? And he's like, yeah, how about Thursday around 7:30? No. Like what? I hope that hasn't happened. But that's what we mean by isolation. Do you find yourself wanting to set it up so that you're kind of alone? Any questions? No? Well, somehow we ended up early with you guys. I think they took longer on Tuesday with the ethical dilemmas, but that's okay. Things change at pace. So there's an online lecture. So where we're headed next is something called experiential therapy. It's not one theory. It's like a collection of different ideas, and kind of gonna hover there for a while. So it's a fun box to talk about. But the online lecture is just like an introduction to it, without anything really specific. So that'll get posted. And before I forget, an extra credit opportunity has arisen. You don't have to do it, of course. I run something called the Humor Lab. Some of you know that. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's just a cog lab. That's all it is. But anyway, I teach the psychic humor course, and every once in a while we do a research project in that class, and we've started one. And of course, we need people to participate. So if you participate in the research project, we'll give you extra credit, and the extra credit would be taking an exam grade and bumping it up to a different. In other words, if you got a B, you have an A. If you got a B minus, you have an A minus. If you got a D, you got a C. So if that's something that you'd like to do, again, you don't have to. But if you'd like to do it, I sent an email out, didn't I? I thought I did. So I've heard from some people, and that's wonderful. I'm perfectly fine. If that's something you'd like to do, just let me know, and I can give you the details of what that's all about. But other than that, I'm done. That's it. No, you can keep it for your scrapbook that you're making. And I will end the live stream.